morning to you. On behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I welcome you to A Climate of Change, our weekly live cast exploring with thought leaders from across Canada what this wildly unprecedented moment in history means for our province, this country, the economic system, and specifically the climate crisis. This will be our last broadcast before a summer hiatus ending in late August at a date and with a guest to be determined. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Eyaksi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. I'd also make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our nieces and nephews and grandchildren, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. For those of you watching tonight via Facebook Live or on the Zoomcast, please feel free to post your questions for our guest. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Should you wish me not to say your name, please type the word anonymous before your question, as this show will be shared to our social networks. Otherwise, we'll assume your consent in the use of your name in the broadcast. Tonight's guest is Alberta's own David Dodge of Green Energy Futures, who has been earnestly documenting the clean energy revolution since 2012, producing a staggering now 254 episodes, I believe, featuring real people implementing real clean energy solutions, quite often right here in this province. I can tell you Mr. Dodge is considered by many to be one of the people responsible for making Edmonton the provincial leader that it now is on climate issues, and we're very lucky to have him with us here tonight. David Dodge, welcome to A Climate of Change.
Thank you, Steve. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So it's well known here in Calgary that amongst the climate savvy, we'll say, that Edmonton is running circles around Calgary when it comes to the climate stuff. And you've had your hands, you've been in that right up to your neck working on that. And so I guess, what can you tell us about how you engaged with the city to start making that city do some of the right things on climate?
Well, Steve, I don't know if it's how I engage with the city, but I consider myself just to be another cog in the wheel. But we have a pretty good wheel in Edmonton, and it's got lots of cogs in it. And, you know, I think the commitment to this kind of thing goes back many, many years in this city. In fact, I would attribute a lot of their action from the city's perspective to the administration that has been toiling away on this for 20 some years. Right. I mean, they did a policy called The Way We Green years ago. And in there, you will find a commitment. Nobody knows this, but you'll find a commitment to build a carbon neutral city. And that was many, many years ago. Of course, nobody paid any attention to it then. But those were the seeds that eventually led to Edmonton developing its energy transition plan, which is, I think, very admirable, especially when you consider Edmonton, like Calgary, are among the highest per capita emitters of carbon in the world. You know, right. The graphs that document cities and their carbon emissions start at 20 tons per capita, and that's where both of us sit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's we're first place when it comes to being bad on climate, and it was shocking to me that when I did look at those numbers by the cities, you know, we want to sort of maybe in this city say, oh well, you know, we have an oil and gas industry, and there's all of that, and that's why our numbers are the way they are. But if you take the oil and gas industry out of it, we're still amongst the worst in the world or worst certainly in Canada on emissions.
And that's the thing, you know, and what I love, what I think Edmonton has always done is they've never made these questions ideological. They just tackled them as issues. And you know what, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on in Edmonton, there's room for you in tackling some of these issues. And I think that is a difference between Edmonton and Calgary. We don't spend a lot of time debating whether a policy is a conservative policy or a liberal policy or a socialist policy. We try to stay focused on the issues, which I think is definitely one of the secrets to success. You know, it's a big task. And I think back to, I think it was about a year and a half ago when Edmonton, of all the cities in the world, hosted the very first IPCC climate change science and Cities conference in the world.
Right.
The very first conference was held in Edmonton. And I remember our mayor, Don Iveson, telling the story of how that happened. And he said, you know, their reaction originally when we made the overture was, "Are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, why would we want to hold a climate conference in the middle of oil country in Edmonton, Alberta?"
Yeah.
And somehow we convinced them. And I think the thing is that we don't dwell on the fact that we're the worst. We dwell on the fact that we're trying, and we're trying very sincerely to make an effort to reduce those emissions. And I think that is the key ingredient to any successful policy. If you start dwelling on the fact that we're terrible and we need all these excuses why we can't be better, we don't do that. We talk about how can we do it. It's a big challenge. You look at the Paris 2-degree goals. And in fact, City Council last year passed a motion to update the energy transition strategy, which was already pretty good, to match the goals, the 2-degree goals or even the 1.5-degree goals, of the Paris Accord, which is crazy ambitious for a city like Edmonton or Calgary.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, you know, there are differences between Calgary and Edmonton. There's a number of them. And when I think about one of the differences about the reluctance or not about embracing climate in a serious way, I think part of it, I often think of it in the under the lens that Calgary seems to be is the corporate head office of oil and gas, and that's whereas Edmonton seems to be more of a blue collar component to that. Does that make would you agree with that?
That's a very Calgary view of Edmonton, I think, there, Steve.
Well, I was going to say, if we can get a rivalry going, like everybody cares about hockey, we do it on climate, we win this thing.
For sure. You know, I think it's funny because I remember years ago, and maybe it was early in my green energy futures work, I was doing an interview, I think it was with a Calgary Herald reporter, and she asked me the question, how can you be doing a series on clean energy and renewable energy when you're from Edmonton, Alberta, and you work in the oil capital of Canada? And I said, well, first of all, I don't understand the question because, you know, the people, in my experience, the people that know as much or more than most people about these issues and about clean energy are the same engineers sitting in the same glass towers in downtown Calgary who are very curious and very interested in this sort of thing. And as I've done 250 documentaries across Canada, I have to tell you, many of the entrepreneurs I've stumbled across who are doing amazing things in this space come from the oil industry. You know, one of my favorite stories is about Green Gate Power. I was I think the 4th or 5th story I ever did, and I've returned to do other stories since then. Green Gate Power is a tiny little company from Calgary that was started by Dan Balaban, who used to sell software to the oil industry and probably made money hand over fist doing that. So Lord knows why he would try to sell wind energy, especially 10 years ago when it was very hard to sell wind energy and it wasn't very lucrative to sell wind energy. And you know, his experience was from the oil industry, and I've seen that story repeat itself again and again.
Yeah, yep, that makes sense. So week in, week out, I end up asking of my guests what they think climate activists such as myself or climate organizations like the Calgary Climate Hub can do to start moving our city in the right direction. And specifically, I've been asking how we can take advantage of this moment where governments around the world are looking at how they've got to create stimulus programs and jobs programs and making sure that that money goes to the right things. So this week, it's of immense value to have, I feel like, to have you on here, given the work that you've done with Edmonton. And I mean, what advice would you have for myself and for the Calgary Climate Hub and climate people at large during this time to try to extract some of those opportunities?
Well, I think, first of all, you work with the people who want to work on this. That's a really big secret right there. Like, stop fighting the people who don't want to do anything and work with the people who actually want to make progress. That'll make much more productive use of your time right out of the chute. But, you know, I think anything that doubles down on the crises, the multiple crises, is going to be a good thing right now. And there's certainly a lot of people talking about that. I think the federal government is very cognizant of that. I know the Edmonton government is. I would assume Calgary is aware of this. that, if we're, and also there's a tremendous openness right now. We're reevaluating everything right now, it seems,
Yeah.
in this COVID crisis, from racism to how we get our energy to just about everything. It's really kind of a fascinating time.
To a basic income. I keep seeing, I saw in the National Post, they're talking about a basic income. And then the same day I saw something on the Globe and Mail along the same lines. And yeah, I think a lot of things have really, really shifted for people during this time.
So if we're going to spend crazy money trying to recover from this, then why not spend crazy money that helps solve both crises? And the funny thing is, spending money on green things and new green sustainable industries is not like a frivolous thing to do at all. It's actually the one thing we can do that could actually stands a chance of building our cities into places where our kids will have jobs in the future, and a place where people will actually want to live. Now think about that in terms of the climate crisis. It's not just whether we rock the oil industry now or not, it's 10, 15, 20 years from now, who will want to live here, if anyone? And, if we diversify and if we make a serious effort at tackling the climate crisis, people will still want to live here, number one. And number two, there will be jobs for our kids.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned working with people that want to work with you. And, for me, I feel like at the municipal level, there's a mayor here I can work with, and there are city councilors that I can work with. And we just extracted a win on the Green Line in the municipal level. And then going to the macro-ish level with Justin Trudeau's federal government, I feel like there's people that I can work with there. I feel like they want to push this thing too, and they see the right things. But at the provincial level, we don't have as much of a willing partner there. I consider it an ideological opposition, and I don't think you get a better example than Energy Efficiency Alberta, given that they were for every dollar you put in, it was making $4 or something like that. And so it seems to me this provincial government decided to leave money on the table, which doesn't make any sense. And it only really makes sense if you look at all the other things that they're doing, which it seems ideologically opposed to doing stuff on climate. But how do we engage how do we play ball with somebody who does not want to pick up the glove?
Interesting question.
And, I ask interesting questions, buddy, I'll tell you.
My stock answer to that is I work with people who want to make progress, and I don't spend a lot of time working with people who don't. So, just to speak to that, perhaps intellectually, I would have thought, and I try to work with anybody, and I would have thought that policies like energy efficiency would work for even diehard conservatives. In fact, energy efficiency is a conservative policy to begin with. It's the only way you can make money reducing emissions. And Energy Efficiency Alberta showed that we could, save Albertans, I think it was $600 million by investing in energy efficiency, and generate about $800 million worth of economic activity. It's like a terrific thing. So it's a little befuddling to me why that is not a higher priority, and why it's Energy Efficiency Alberta is on the way out, as the founding chairman of the board of that organization. And also, another policy I thought about in the context of a conservative provincial government was PACE financing. So financing is magical. Like, I actually think PACE, if implemented well, and we seem to find so many excuses not to get this moving, sometimes it irks me to no end. PACE is so amazing. Property assessed clean energy financing would allow you, Steve, to buy solar for your home and have it fully funded, 100% funded by a loan that you pay back based on the return on investment. So if the return on investment is 25 years, or let's say 20 years, you would pay back equal payments over 20 years or 25 years, and you would start benefiting from that solar system today, and your risk would be zero, because that debt and the benefit transfers to another owner should you sell your house. And the beautiful thing about PACE financing is it involves no public money.
Right.
It's your money.
Yeah.
We're just finding a way for you to borrow it in a way that it makes economic sense. And actually, really, if people understood PACE and if we implemented it properly, there would be no excuse for anybody not putting solar on their home or doing energy efficiency retrofits or anything like that, because first of all, they wouldn't fund you unless it would provide a positive return on investment. And so even if it's a small return on investment, you would do it. So those are two things I would have thought would be great policies for a conservative government. So we don't seem to see too much emphasis on those things. So like I said, I spend my time working with the cities. And in fact, historically, on issues like this, really problematic issues like this, cities have been the leaders. And, you know, cities are the governments that are closest to the voters. They have to interact with them and deal with them every day. They feel their pain, they feel their pressure. And, you know, even on a difficult issue like this, it's amazing. It's cities around the world that are making the big headway and driving the bus on climate change.
I'm really glad you brought up PACE, because once I found out what that is and how it works, it's just one of those things where once you know what it is, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're just like, and that's that solution. And I feel like that's one of those big ticket solutions that any jurisdiction that does it, they're going to start extracting wins on climate. And so that could segue into a few different other questions that I have here on my ever-growing list of questions. But you know, so PACE would be one of these solutions that can help get us to a low carbon transition. What are some other either technologies or industries that we could invest in as part of a just recovery plan that you think would be a really tight fit for Alberta?
There are so many things. You know, there's a lot of really big things that we need to do. And if you look at it, it can look pretty daunting. You know, if you realize that buildings are 30 or 35% of emissions in a city like Edmonton or Calgary, and you realize how hard it is to renovate old buildings to net zero, then you start to get frustrated. But instead of looking at it that way, look at the art of the possibility. And to me, you know, I've spent a lot of time doing that. And all I find is really news to get excited about, despite what you're hearing on Facebook or on Twitter and the news or wherever. You know, look at the auto industry. We know the auto industry is not led by a bunch of paragons of progressive development. You know, those are guys that have age-old business plans, you know, that actually wound up because of their invention, cars, redesigning cities for automobiles, which, you know, has been a disaster for sustainability over the long run. But look at that industry now. You know, just 2 years ago, there were probably half a dozen vehicles that were meaningful in the electric vehicle market. You know, there's 3 Teslas, a Nissan Leaf, and maybe some Volts and Bolts. They occupied pretty much all the sales in Canada, and those sales were not very big. But fast forward to 2019, last year, thanks to Elon Musk and his vision for creating the most amazing car, not just a better car, not just a more environmentally friendly car, but a better car, like a way better car. People are jazzed about this, and the market is moving and policies are moving. And last year, just about every major auto company in the world committed to investing money in electric vehicles. There's now $300 billion committed to electric vehicles. There are 500 to 700 models under development for release by 2025. I'll remind you, that's just 5 years away. And we're already starting to see those models come out. Why are they doing this? Well, I think we're over the hill with that issue. You know, that seemed like a really big, hard issue just a few years ago. And now we're already over the hill because the automakers are investing every penny they've got in owning that space. Volkswagen itself, with Porsche and Audi, is investing $91 billion in developing 300 models of electric cars, which is unbelievable. So the technology's better, we need the emissions reductions, but there's also policy motives behind this. If you look at a city like Copenhagen, they're gonna ban diesel cars from their streets by 2025. They're gonna ban gas cars by 2030. And there's, I think, 50 to 100 other jurisdictions that also have policies like that. I think Vancouver has a policy, it's a little further out in the future, but a policy of getting rid of internal combustion engines on their streets. So there's also a policy angle to this. And that's a big factor. So that's like a third of emissions right there, transportation. And I'm not saying the electric car is the only solution, but what I'm saying is, wow, you know, that seemed like a really hard thing a few years ago. And we're moving.
Yeah, and California is making some big moves too. It sounds like by 2025, I think they're getting rid of for commercial trucking. It's all supposed to be electric or something like that. But either way, there's a bunch of moves that's going on with California. And when California moves around, then that's a lot of people and that's a lot of cars.
Well, I always used to hear this in the context of the city's energy transition plan. What are you going to do with all those trucks, all those working vehicles that, there don't seem to be a lot of alternatives for? Well, also last year, Amazon got the idea that they wanted to have their vehicles electric. So they actually put in an order for, a small number of electric delivery vans, about 100,000.
Right. Yeah.
And so they're thereby creating the market for electric delivery vans. And in fact, they bought part of the company. They ordered them from Rivian out of Michigan. And then less than a month later, what happens? UPS orders 10,000 electric delivery vehicles. So change can come fast, and that market is going to change overnight because of that. And, I said before, the auto industry is moving. And, there's probably some skepticism in the audience, and you're probably wise to be skeptical. But, when the big guys who are not known to be leaders in this space, start to take their signature vehicles and commit them, you can buy the new Mustang this year that looks and feels a lot like a Tesla Model S and performs almost as good, not quite as good, I don't think. And next year, the F-150, the best-selling vehicle in North America, and of course not the best gas mileage vehicle on the road, is going electric next year. So we know we're heading over the hill on these.
Well, I've always said, actually, I think a friend of mine you would have interviewed on your show, Peter Darlington.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I talk with him, I see the future where, like, he's got panels on his roof and he plugs his vehicle in, and that's the end. He doesn't have to stop at a gas station unless he needs a pack of gum. And to me, like, every street, as soon as there's one person on that street who has that going on and has conversations with his neighbor, it's over. Because if those panels are made affordable by a policy tool like PACE to make those panels accessible to you, and the cost of those electric cars come down, then eventually the guy who's not doing that is the dumb guy on the block. So
Peter Darlington is an amazing guy, I have to say. He
is, yeah.
He's a regular guy. I think his company basically did siding for homes and things like that, like renovating homes. And then he got this idea he's going to start a business on the side. And his business on the side is to renovate buildings to net zero, which is still, as he's found, a fairly difficult thing to do. He did it to his own home, and he found it cost $100,000. It's still worth doing it, but that seems like a really big hit to me. But then lo and behold, in our work in the Energy Transition Committee in Edmonton, I ran across another guy called Jacob Komar, who's a geothermal guy. And he's done some modeling. He thinks he can take an old beater home, like a 70s home, and turn it into net zero for half that by using geothermal. And so there's innovation happening like crazy out there.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of Peter Darlington's business. It's called Solar Homes, and so anybody who's thinking about making that transition, I'd check into Peter there and tell him me and Dave sent you. Okay, so Dave, I guess the other question for the city of Calgary, you know us pretty well here. What sorts of stimulus do you think we could benefit from in this particular city, as far as it relates to low carbon transition?
I have a tough time answering that in Edmonton, where I'm fairly intimately familiar. I think right now the key is to understand your goals, and your goals are to reduce emissions. Understand the things you need to do, the things you want to do, and the things you could do. Because we don't have control over where that stimulus is coming and what they're going to ask for. I know cities have tried to influence the federal government a lot, and the province is announcing money that they're spending right now. And so I think the big secret for cities right now is to have a clear climate plan. So Edmonton's energy transition plan is a long list of all the things, many things we need to do. And so you're going to need to be nimble, and you need to be flexible and adaptable. So, if there's suddenly money to do green buildings, then that's where you turn your attention. And we're just going to have to be nimble. The city of Edmonton knows that, and I would imagine the city of Calgary knows that. It's hard for cities to do that. I acknowledge that, but now more than ever, this could be a golden opportunity that you really shouldn't miss.
Right. So, turning to the industry that many people believe is the backbone of our province, and economically, I guess it is. Um, we've watched over the last 5 years or so global forces just pound oil and gas, be it America's fracking revolution to, nowadays the big money players internationally aren't looking to drop money into the tar sands, and then you get hit by coronavirus and the whole world gets to see the concept of negative oil, which is mind blowing. And have people just not knowing where to put the stuff. They were talking about digging holes to store it underground. If you can dig that, you're gonna go underground to get it, and then you're gonna dig a hole, and then you're gonna drop it back. And anyways, what do you think Alberta? I know the provincial at the provincial leadership. I don't see them learning the right lessons quickly enough. Do you think we Albertans are going to be able to see the writing on the wall in time?
Sometimes you can get depressed. I mean, if you get your news from Facebook, you can easily take yourself down a rabbit hole that basically wants you to shoot yourself.
They call it doom scrolling. Doom scrolling. You're scrolling through doom. Yeah.
But in my experience with real people on the ground, I don't spend any time slagging the oil industry. It's our heritage. Yep. It's what got me where I am. Half my family works in the oil industry. It doesn't mean I think it's going to be a big part of the future, and it doesn't mean I'm not totally in favor of an energy transition. I am, but I don't spend any time slagging it. And here's why. In my experience, as a little side trip, because of Green Energy Futures, because I've essentially gathered all this knowledge and all these examples about all these different technologies, I try to do stories about things that work. And so when you do that, you have a lot of examples of things people can actually do. So for whatever weird reason, I have been asked to do about 150 keynote addresses and speeches in the last 4 years. And I got to tell you, the image we have and we're told exists by populist politicians is not real all the time at all. Mm-hmm. Right. I was invited to one of my most amazing, 2 examples. I was invited to Brazeau County, which is Drayton Valley, Alberta, which is the heart of the oil industry. And they asked me to come do a talk, not at night to a public audience, but to their council, to Reeve Council. So this was at a live council meeting. I did an 1.5-hour slideshow. The media was there, the public was there. I did an 1.5-hour slideshow on solutions, clean energy solutions. And then we had a half-hour to an hour discussion in the live council meeting about it. And why? Because they're not slagging the oil industry. They love the oil industry, but they're also looking for alternatives. They get it. The world is moving, and we've always needed to diversify in this province anyways. And so people are interested in that. Last year, another example. So I got a call from these folks from Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. I don't know if you know where that is.
I don't.
In the Northern Rockies, in the middle of pretty much nowhere. And Tumbler Ridge is a beautiful little town in the mountains that is basically owned by the coal industry. And so Coal Forum 2019 invited me to be their keynote speaker. And I thought, so I phoned them back and I said, do you know who you're inviting? I said, I'm going to come and I'm going to talk about solar. I'm going to talk about green buildings and vehicles and electric vehicles, blah, blah, blah. And they said, yeah, no, we get it. We know what you're going to talk about. And that's what we want to do. And Steve, one of my favorite experiences was that event. I went up there and I've never been shown so much respect for the work I do anywhere. I'm in a room with literally every mayor, councillor, reeve, and CEO of companies in the region. Like every single influencer in the region was in the room and part of a discussion. So I did my same 1.5-hour presentation, and then we had an hour discussion about these alternatives, and they too are looking for alternatives. Now their coal is metallurgical coal. So frankly, it's coal we actually need. We're using that coal to build wind turbines and other things. It's not coal you burn. But still, they know they need to diversify, and they know they have serious image problems. And, I was sitting beside the CEO of the coal company, and kind of depressing for him, but he said, my son goes to high school here, and he came home the other day and he said, Dad, I will never work in your
Yeah.
industry. And that's how the kids talk. I know, because I went to sessions with the kids in the high school. That's how they talk there. So, they want to have this discussion. They're very interested in diversifying their economy, as is everyone else. So let's do it. Let's not just talk about it.
I after the tech Frontier pulling out of their bid, and then there was that incredible letter from the CEO explaining why. I think it was that night or the next day, the Calgary Chamber of Commerce was saying, "Hey, we need a climate plan, guys." And it was just sort of like, I didn't expect that from them. They're very, they've always been, this is the backbone of our economy and rah and all of that, I think. But that's an encouraging sign. There's other very staunch, I would say, conservative business outlets that are starting to see that writing on the wall, and hopefully that's going to start triggering some of the change we need for the people.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen a fair amount of that. And of course, I have my own little bubble in the world, because I seek out the most inspiring people doing the most inspiring projects. So that tends to give one a bit of a distorted view of things.
Yeah.
I like it though. I like my little bubble. So I plan on staying there.
Sure.
But I also plan on sharing those stories, because I think they're worth inspiring other folks. And the story right behind me on the screen was last week's story, 253 Neste, how an oil company became the largest producer of renewable diesel fuels in the world. So this is really funny. Our tiny little media project from Edmonton, Alberta, which had an audience of 0 in the beginning 8 or 9 years ago, I was called by their communications people. This is a Finnish national oil company. I got a call from their communications people in Miami, Florida, asking me to interview the president of Neste Oil in Houston, Texas. And, I get pictures like this all the time. So I started skimming the email, and I thought, oh my God, there's a story here.
Yeah.
I can't ignore this one. I interviewed the guy. If you got to listen to this. Like, I actually put the whole interview up from that story. This is the president of an oil company, and they've been working on renewable fuels for 15 years. They now produce 3.4 trillion liters of renewable fuels, which are now used in jet planes, trucks, whatever else. And so I asked him, the big question is not whether we can do that. We can do it. And he admitted it was very hard. Like, it's not easy. It's not like sticking a straw in the ground and pulling that stuff out and burning it. No, you've got to run around to all the McDonald's all over Europe, gather up all their cooking oil, and then turn that into a renewable fuel. And that and another 100 or thousands of companies that have waste materials, from forestry companies to agricultural companies. But it's hard. But I asked him at the end of the interview, I said, so what is the future? Where are we going to go? He gave me the most pragmatic answer I could have ever predicted from a president of an oil company. He said, we are heading for a polyfuel future. And so part of that will be renewable fuels. We can't replace oil with renewable fuels. The quantities are just too big, and we would need, more waste than we have, frankly. And he said, for cars, you'll probably see them go electric. He said for trucks, some of them will need renewable fuels, some of them will go hydrogen. So he gave me the most pragmatic answer ever, but the answer instructively was that we are heading for a vast energy transition. And that's what I gleaned from that answer. And I was just so excited to hear that from an oil company president.
Right. Yeah, it seems when you talk to a lot of the CEOs, they're some of them are, they're not afraid to admit they see the writing on the walls also. But switching tacks, the coronavirus was something that all of a sudden we just started to hear more and more of. It went from just a slight signal to all of a sudden it was a great big thing, and then all of a sudden we're in lockdown, and all over the world. All of us pressed pause on everything we were doing. And I feel like that might have been one of the most, like this historical moment where everybody for a second is looking at things and thinking about, they've learned something that you can't unlearn. And so I talk about teachable moments. And the one that I repeat week in, week out is just that the coronavirus taught me that you can't tell me as a climate advocate that we can't afford to do something, or that it's too big for us to do. Because what we've just seen that all humans for a few weeks were able to shut things right down. And whatever we thought was possible, I live downtown Calgary. It was a ghost town, and everybody was locked away, and we all did it together for a little while. What was, when the coronavirus struck and you're in lockdown, you're looking out that window and thinking about the world, what's the big teachable moment that you feel like, okay, the world can't unsee this?
I think you kind of put your finger on it, Steve. I think what it turned out to be was a great big experiment. And people were feeling like they had to do things differently. And so this whole working from home thing, you can't take that back. Right. I just saw a memo from the city of Edmonton that was acknowledging that many people who are working at home that work for the city of Edmonton, and I think they have 5,000 or 7,000 employees, believe they're more productive working at home. Not everybody thinks it's a terrific idea, but I don't think we can unlearn this. And I think that is a terrific thing that will actually lead to all kinds of side effects in the future, among which could be a new appreciation of different urban design. We also saw at the beginning of the crisis a rush to bicycles.
Yes.
So, I couldn't convince my kids to ride their bicycles to school because it was so passé, like I did that as a kid, but kids didn't do that when my kids went to school. Yeah. And now families are running out, buying up all the bicycles. And they're even having events to help people who can't afford bicycles get bicycles, because everybody wants bicycles, which ironically, because it's safe, you can maintain social distancing, get out, get some exercise. What a terrible thing to do, go and get some exercise, spend time with your family, blah, blah, blah. And so people are starting to use them for transportation. I think there's some downsides though too, Steve, that we're gonna have to worry about. One of the big things we think about in energy transition is mode shift. And there are cities that are very good at that. So that's the idea of getting rid of cars as much as possible, and not spending as much on the infrastructure required for all those cars, which is very, very, very expensive, and getting more people to take transit, or even better, to walk or to ride bicycles or some active form of transportation. I worry a little bit about transit right now. I think we'll get through it, but it's going to be interesting how we respond to this, because I think people are going to be afraid of transit for a while. Now, in my la-la land, I'm hoping they all go to bicycles, but I think a lot of them are, and then we've seen this, high schools are having drive-in graduations, and there will be some gravitation towards the car. So there's pluses and minuses. I love the fact that we're trying things, all kinds of things, and that you saw the price of gas plummet because the use of gas went way down, the use of cars went way down. Some people were actually saying they should get rebates on their insurance because they're not driving their cars anymore. I love that innovativeness that came out of us in this. For me, I love working at home. I always did work at home. So when I went home from an office I was working in, I was happy, frankly.
Yeah. So, I since this thing hit, there's a percentage of folks that I've engaged with who, they're really mad at China. They know about the name of the city, Wuhan, and they know about wet markets, and they're very, very upset about that. And it's those people over there doing that thing. And to me, my response has been, just about every major industry that we're involved with is a wet market right now. There's just so many different things that we know is not the right way to do this and will blow up in our faces, and we're not doing anything about it. Plastics in the ocean, the climate crisis, all of it, to me, tomato, they're all wet markets. Do you think there's enough? Is this starting to move people towards thinking that the model of capitalism in which returning a maximum share to your shareholders is the number one consideration, and human safety and the environment and everything else is a deep, distant other concern? Has that shifted, do you think, amongst everybody?
It's not an area I spend a lot of time thinking about, Steve, but I do think there has been a market change in that respect, because you think about how the difference between how Canadians responded to the crisis and Americans. So, a good number of Americans went to the streets to protest overreach by the government when the
Yeah.
government was telling them to stay home and to not spread the virus.
Right.
The US president told people we should stop testing because we keep finding people who have the virus. And, if we stop testing, we won't find people with the virus and we won't have
Right.
so many numbers with, who caught the virus. Like, I find that mind-boggling.
Horrific. Yeah.
But in Canada, it really did, like the differences between our two countries shone through better than I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
Canadians have been very accepting, very mature, very responsible. Where some of us are better at it than others, obviously, but we accept that this is a crisis. We're not abusing Dina Henshaw. Is that her name, Dr. Henshaw?
Yeah.
In the States, there are doctors like her who are getting death threats because they're asking them, not to contact each other, not to go to restaurants, whatever else. And we're worshiping them and respecting them. We're respecting the science, which, that makes me very, very proud as a Canadian, because if there ever was a time to listen to the science, it's the COVID thing. And hopefully you'll take that same thinking and extend it to the climate crisis. But big differences between the two countries, and you're seeing it in how this thing's panning out. They're having big problems in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, no, the worst in the world, and predictably, all of it was predictable every step of the way. You didn't need to be a virologist to see a lot of that coming. This next question, there's no expertise that you can possibly come up with a definitive answer there, but 10 years from now, do you think we're going to be looking back at this time and saying, well, the coronavirus really kick-started the low-carbon transition? Everything that happened because of that, and then all the countries using stimulus money, some of them will take that opportunity to transition, and that'll cause other, is there a reason for us to feel like maybe this is one of those, when people look back at the climate crisis 500 years from now, this will be one of those ticks on the timeline, coronavirus, and because of that, these sorts of things happen. Do you think this is the trigger?
I don't want to be trite, Steve, but I'm also not going to predict the Edmonton Oilers are going to win the Stanley Cup.
Fair enough.
And really, this will be a seminal moment. Absolutely no question. Nobody will forget this moment who's alive right now, and it'll be a seminal moment in their lifetime. Will it turn out the way you say? I hope so. And I see some positive signs, I think people, even before the COVID crisis, were recognizing finally the gravity of the climate crisis, which is graver than most people want to think about. And so I hope so, but is it a guarantee? No, I wouldn't say it is. There's a lot of work to do.
Right. Okay, so we're going to go to our panelists, but before we do, I have to say a few words. I'll say some words about our sponsor. Skyfire Energy has been designing and installing solar PV systems for homeowners, business owners, utilities, municipalities, and First Nations since 2001. They're an employee-owned, certified B Corporation with offices in Calgary, Edmonton, Penticton, and Regina. Their staff is one of the most experienced and qualified teams in the industry, having completed many of the largest and most complex solar projects in Western Canada. Their vision is to bring the magic of solar power to the world for a stronger, healthier, and more sustainable global community. I'll also take this moment to tell our viewers about the Basic Income Initiative put forward by the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good, an alliance to which the Calgary Climate Hub proudly belongs and works alongside to make positive change in this city. A guaranteed basic income overcomes deficiencies in our social safety net and is a mechanism that lifts people out of poverty and puts money in the marketplace. It has been shown to reduce healthcare costs, criminal justice costs, and increase rates of school completion. No Canadian should have to live in poverty or be thrust into poverty by a public health crisis or economic emergency. It's a part of the just transition or just recovery solution set in my books, and it's also my personal perspective that a basic income alongside what's called a Housing First initiative, a link describing for which will be in the chat, those two policies together single-handedly eliminates poverty and homelessness, and with jobs and careers increasingly disappearing, In the face of robotization and automation, a universal basic income is an inevitability. And like most things I've found when it comes to sustainability, and probably Dave could back me up on this part, it's cheaper than how we're doing things now. As of April 21st of this year, no less than 50 Canadian senators have expressed support of a basic income to Prime Minister Trudeau, and the Alliance and myself would like you to consider adding your name to the effort. You can access our petition and get more information on this increasingly viable civilizational upgrade at calgarycommongood.org/basic_income, the link for which is in the chat. Actually, I didn't mean to assume you agree with the basic income principles, Dave, but I would assume that you agree with me that usually when it comes to sustainability, it ends up being a cheaper way to do things than how we're doing things now. Does that sound about right?
It's not an area I spent a lot of time on, Steve,
Right.
to be honest. I really haven't even looked at it. It's not that I wouldn't be sympathetic, but I'd be speaking out of the side of my mouth.
Fair enough. Okay, so our first panelist is her name is Isabelle Couture. She is the leader of a group called Plastic Free YYC, which is a very impressive Calgary-based organization doing great work trying to eliminate single-use plastics, and they impress me all the time. So I'm very happy to have Isabelle Couture on here. But before I let her talk, I'm just going to mention that Plastic Free YYC has an event coming up. It's August 27th to August 30th. It is the online Zero Waste Festival. And I've gone to the non-online version, and it's a great time. This is how Plastic Free is adapting to COVID, is they've got an online version, and I'm going to check it out, and I recommend everybody who's within range of my voice to sign up and check it out. Isabelle, take it away.
Thanks so much, Steve, and hi, David. My question is, so I think that the topic of the energy transition can be fairly daunting for a lot of people. So I was wondering if you can maybe make some suggestions as to some very hands-on, accessible actions that Albertans, Calgarians can take to support and engage the transition.
Oh, that's a really tough one. I thought you were going to ask me something about plastics because
I can later. It's all good.
Okay, I was ready for that. There's so much. When I look at Edmonton's energy transition plan, it's, what we need to do to get to 1.5 degrees? Everything. It's pretty simple. Your house needs to be net zero by a certain date. Your car needs to be zero emissions, or you need to ride a bike. Your energy supply needs to be 100% renewable. And so pretty much everything that falls under that is a solution, which is pretty much everything from soup to nuts. I think learn about it. If you're not familiar with an energy transition plan, the city's Edmonton's plan is pretty cool. And it does have, I think, about 140 actions, even in the old version of the plan that's on the website right now. If you start to look in there, you'll start to see the things that make a difference. Interestingly, energy efficiency is something we can all do, and it is the best. Like, it's the best way to reduce emissions. It's the cheapest way to reduce emissions. And it's something we need to do in a wide scale. Steve and I were talking about the idea of a PACE program that would allow us to undertake massive energy retrofits of our homes, even to take them to net zero, or to put solar on our homes. Without something like PACE, we will never get there, because there's no way governments can have enough incentives to literally make every home net zero by 2040 or 2050 or whatever the carbon neutral deadline is. So we need to do it all. And so any little thing you're doing that puts us on that path, I think almost more important is sharing what you're doing with somebody else, or sharing that conversation with somebody else and doing it together, because we all need to do it. So I would say, anything you're doing is good. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to shoulder responsibility for climate change yourself. I don't think about climate change at all in my day-to-day life. People that have done that, it's been had very dire outcomes for themselves mentally. So I just, the way I look at it is I do whatever I can today, and I do it as well as I can, and I feel good at the end of the day, and I have a beer at the end of the day, and I celebrate. It's just my teeny little contribution, but I'm going to do it as well as I can, and I'm going to feel great about it at the end of the day. So whatever little thing you do, it's not inconsequential. It's part of the big puzzle.
Do you have a follow-up question, Isabel, or did that get rid? Oh, yeah, go for it.
Absolutely. If I can actually use my follow-up to ask maybe a question about plastics, might as well, right?
Sure.
So I saw that you recently did, a few months ago, an episode on EPR, extended producer responsibility. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, for the benefit of everyone, explaining a little bit about what that is and what the next step should be, since municipalities are very much on board with having an EPR framework in Alberta, but still the provincial government does not seem to be wanting to take action at this time, or there hasn't been any movement in that direction. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
You know, it's funny because last year I was invited to speak at the Alberta Recycling Council conference in, I think it was in Jasper. And it was the first time I'd ever gone to one. And, you know, frankly, I hadn't thought about recycling for probably a decade because in my mind, we all started adopting recycling 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And, you know, there was a little too much of I recycle, therefore the environment's fine, you know, and no, that's like step one, right? And so when I went to that conference, I met a bunch of people who were thinking about how recycling gets to recycling 2.0, which is, you know, it needs to be ramped up radically. And EPR, extended producer responsibility, what it does is it lays the responsibility for materials that people produce on the producers. So if I'm going to produce a god-awful thing or a really cool thing in a god-awful package, you know, that is almost impossible to recycle, and I've got to pay to recycle that when it's done, I'm not going to be producing that thing for very long, because I'm going to start using something that is worth money so that I can take that raw material and sell it when I'm done, or recycle it and make something out of it. So the whole idea of making producers responsible, by the way, is the most conservative philosophy you could ever possibly think of. You know, it's making people responsible for the things they produce. And by the way, the thing that got me really jazzed about it is this is a massive business opportunity. If we were to adopt EPR on a wide scale, we would create jobs like there's no tomorrow. And these are really good industries. I also interviewed Jeff, I think his name was, the fellow from the bottle organization that recycles bottles. And he was giving me the stats on jobs just to do with returning bottles, like beer bottles and pop bottles and those kinds of things. It's staggering. Those are great jobs. Those are jobs based on sustainability. There's a whole nonprofit industry around it that uses them as fundraisers, everybody from Boy Scouts to hockey teams and whoever else. And all for what? To stop stuff from going to the landfill. And it's a tremendous example. That is an example of an EPR program. We're not going to pay deposits on things probably in most EPR programs, but when you make the producers responsible, it has tremendous benefits. We could really eliminate a lot of those plastics that are finding their way into the oceans because they're so hard to recycle. You got to stop producing them.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on, Isabel. Thanks for the great work that you do. And for everybody interested in attending Isabel's event, we've put a link into the chat, so check that out. In fact, there are links for everything that we've talked about here today. Go and check that out in the chat. Our next panelist is actually, I met both our next panelist and David Dodge in person for the first time at the event that David spoke about with the IPCC cities event. And so I'm happy to bring on Matthew Chapman from the Climate Reality Project. And just so you know, Matthew has gone across the country and has encouraged the climate conscious to start climate hubs in various zones. And the Calgary Climate Hub is one of those groups. So this is somebody I admire a lot, and along the way he became a great friend. Matthew Chapman, welcome to A Climate of Change.
Thank you so much, Steve, and great to see you again, David. Yeah, it has been a couple of years, and that was really a summit moment for me, seeing all the researchers come together, getting to know them, getting to know the people behind the science, I think was a really important thing. And that helped me change kind of my own narrative as to where I go for truth. You know, am I going to put my faith in these reports coming out of Geneva or not? Am I going to, believe that this is an urgency worthy of dedicating my life and my career to, or not? And so for me, culturally, it really shifted where I was going with my life. I mean, I was already in this space, but it really confirmed and affirmed that decision. So to the point, sort of the same question of Isabel, a little bit piggybacking on that. When it comes to people taking action locally, people taking action in their day-to-day lives, yes, do something you enjoy, have a beer at the end of the day. Totally agree with you. Microbrewery, local, if possible.
Dark beer, nice dark beer.
And can you speak a little bit more to the cultural change that's necessary? We've seen kind of the technological changes happen, and those get a lot of play in the media. What we don't necessarily see is how we're going to question the whole mindset of more is better. And the bigger my X, the better. The more material possessions I own, the better. There's a space for efficiency, not only in the way we heat our homes, but also in, like, rationalizing how much home do I need? Rationalizing, do I need a Cybertruck, or could I do with a Model 3? And it's not an insignificant question, because there's a lot of energy both embedded in those products, and the bigger they are, the more it is, and also in what it takes to move several tons of steel and lithium along a road. So yeah, can you speak to culture? What excites you about getting people to change the way they think about what's necessary for me to live a good life?
Well, I think that, Matthew, that's the thing, right? That's where we have to get to. That is the hard thing. Like me selling you an LED light bulb, that's not so hard. Me getting you to adopt a new lifestyle where you appreciate new forms of urban design that aren't giant lots in the suburbs that require expensive infrastructure and very energy intensive infrastructure, that's a bigger ticket item. But you know what? I think we're on that road. If I think about my kids or younger folks these days, I'm the problem. Like I learned to collect stuff. I collected so much stuff in my life. I've spent the last 2 years getting rid of most of it so that I don't burden my kids with it, because I thought that was the thing to do. I collected books, I collect stuff I didn't need. And then in my lifetime, I learned that I didn't need all those record albums, because now I need an iTunes subscription, and I have every record on the planet, and I don't have to actually own a thing. Same goes for books. And I think that mentality is eking its way into the next generation, which is not getting licenses to drive vehicles to the same numbers. Fewer people are getting licenses. More young people want to live a more urban lifestyle where they can walk places, walk to pubs, walk to the store, that sort of thing. This is a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight. But I've always said we build a better mousetrap, and people will buy the mousetrap. So, as we start to build better cities, I think the project that I love the most, I never hear anybody else talk about. So in Edmonton, they have a project called Blatchford, and it's the old airport lands. And we used to have a municipal airport in the middle of the city. And this is the largest planned carbon neutral community in the world. So there's room for 30,000 people to live there. It's 10 minutes from downtown. It's 5 minutes by LRT from downtown. It's right in the heart of the city. And you're not allowed to build a single family home in Blatchford. The least dense form of housing will be townhomes. And yet still, the urban design will feature a fair amount of park space and community gardens and those kinds of things. So you can get the benefit of the land and nature and all that sort of thing, but without everybody trying to have it in their backyard, which, I live in the suburbs now. It's terrible. I have to get excited about house sparrows coming to my yard because it's such an impoverished landscape that we can't attract anything real or any real birds. There's no real ecosystem there whatsoever. And so I think there is hope. I think young folks are changing, and I'm very encouraged by that, but it's a long-term process. And so, that's something we can all do, Matthew, is invest in that and help people understand why that's such a great thing. I was just spending time yesterday around the campfire. I'm at my cabin right now, talking to an old friend of mine who was explaining why he thought new urban design guidelines in the city were horrible and wrecking his neighborhood. And until I started asking him about why, he was just thinking about his view of the world, which hasn't changed very much. But if he thinks about his kids who literally won't be able to afford to buy a house in his neighborhood, the skinny homes that are going in, or the densification that's going in, will actually save the neighborhood in the long run. Those old neighborhoods have schools that are underutilized. They already have invested in playgrounds and all that infrastructure that we need. So there doesn't require a lot of public investment to keep those going. In fact, it's way more expensive as we start to close those schools and we start to get rid of those facilities because we don't need them anymore. But I think as we evolve, people will see the benefits in that. And I think young people are seeing that. They want to live a more urban lifestyle. And they also don't like stuff. I mean, I have a son who owns nothing. He doesn't want anything. Like, I ask him what he wants for his birthday. He doesn't want anything. He doesn't want stuff. And, that's not because he's my son, by the way. Like, it's not, he hasn't adopted my philosophy totally. No, it's just his way, and his friends, some of his friends are like that as well. So I have hope for that. I think culture change is the big task in all of this.
Matthew, you have a chance for a follow-up question if you'd like.
Thanks for that response, David. And to make it more tangible, I mean, it's going to be a bit of a follow-up question, and it's going to be a bit of a pitch. So I'm sharing a link now with the panelists in the chat, and I think it can be reshared with participants maybe afterwards. It is a link to download a document that describes how we can turn our cities into friendly, competitive spaces where we are improving things like the number of EV charging stations, the amount of money that we're paying to fuel our cities, bike lanes, air quality, walkability, landfill waste, local agriculture, local energy, so to the PACE piece and solar roofs. So what we're doing through Climate Hubs and Climate Reality Project Canada is encouraging cities to submit data by citizens knocking on their mayor's door and saying, hey, we want to see transparency. We want to see these things improving. We want to see more energy produced locally. We want to see more local agriculture. We want to see more electric vehicle infrastructure, bike lanes, air quality. So what we're looking to measure here is the things that people have a handle on changing locally. So any of these things, you can go to your local municipal councillor and say, this can be improved. Or is it being improved? Are we measuring? Are we improving? And what we do each year now is we pull that data together. From your perspective, knowing that Alberta is a different beast from the rest of Canada, certainly based on the economic idiosyncrasies, do you think that would fly? What can we do to better adapt a program like this to make it sexy? Aside from putting the Calgary Tower there on the on the cover.
Yeah, way to alienate the Edmontonians. Nice going, Matthew. No, I think that's a terrific initiative. And I think you'd be surprised, very pleasantly surprised how receptive Albertans are to that kind of thing. And we certainly were in Edmonton. Edmonton did this. I remember when the energy transition strategy was passed in Edmonton, there was a bureaucrat that worked for the city who I attribute a lot of the vision to this to. Jim Andreas was his name, and he's retired since then. And I remember fighting with him because I'm a communications guy, and I really think about how I present my stories and how we tell this story and how we talk about climate change. I think about that a lot. And so he was pretty relentless. He said, no, people need to confront climate change and they need to do it head on, and we need to start now. So when they were starting, they knew they needed to do a communications campaign associated with the energy transition plan. So they started Change for Climate, and Change for Climate is a fairly good online presence. They have Twitter accounts and Facebook pages and talks, and they had talks at the IPCC conference that we had a few years ago.
I got the toque.
Yeah, there you go. I still have one too. And, I think that proved to me that I was wrong in my assumptions, and I think I know the space. He was right. And so literally I saw the difference. It was palpable. Just by having all that online conversation about climate change through Change for Climate, it changed the conversation in Edmonton in a very short period of time. Now, the world was changing at the same time, but climate change is a different conversation today, I think in part because of that. So the work you're doing sounds very similar, and I would encourage you to work with your city and encourage them to do that as well. In fact, I'm not sure if Calgary has one, but I would suggest another great thing you should ask your city to do is to create an energy transition advisory committee. That was one of the things we did in Edmonton early on in the process. And council, in their infinite wisdom, appointed a bunch of crazy people who actually really support energy transition to the committee. I had the privilege of being the founding co-chair of that for the first 4 years. And I'll tell you, because we had the backing of council, just about every department in the city came to us and wanted us to look at their projects. And I know for a fact, we influenced the city plan, for example. We were going through a whole new city plan. This is a 10-year plan for the city. We looked at the city plan as a committee. They thought we were just another stakeholder. And, when you do a city plan, you get how many opinions about how it should go, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 opinions about which direction it should go in from every interest group you can think of. We said, no, look, our city has said that climate change is a priority. Our city has said that energy transition is a priority. This is a big deal. This takes all hands on deck if we're going to do this. And so we said, we not only think climate change should be a pillar in this, we think it should be the envelope in which everything else is wrapped. And lo and behold, if you look at our new city plan, it's pretty amazing. And so, I think getting involved in the process, having credible people advise council, like the other reason our council appointed this committee is, frankly, these issues come before city council, and councils and governments are befuddled by them because they hear all kinds of crazy ideas about, whether green energy is flaky or not, and climate change is not real, whatever. They hear all these counter opinions, and it's very hard for them to have a rational conversation about this at a council meeting. After they appointed us, they would insist that we were at every single meeting that considered new transportation plans or new energy plans or whatever it was. And we were kind of their interpreters, and we were their trusted advisors. We advise council, we don't advise the administration. And they were comforted so much by that they were able to make much stronger decisions. So I would encourage you to push for stuff like that. And I would also encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and try to enlist the city in your effort and, go all guns blazing.
Thank you for the questions, Matt. And actually, while I've got you on the hot seat here, it seems to me that maybe we'd like to have you on as a guest when we open up these interviews in the fall, and you could talk a little bit more about the National Climate League and about Climate Reality Project generally. Is that, well, I've got you on the hot seat here. Am I able to get you to commit to that?
You know what? Send over the paperwork. I'll have my people look at it, and we'll see what we can do.
He's already a star. Look at him, man.
I won't have a beard at that time. I can promise you that. So I don't know if that disqualifies me.
You got a Che Guevara thing going on there.
Is that a prerequisite for being on this show? It seems to me like it might be.
It's really not.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on, Matt. You're a
Thanks,
solid
guys.
climate ally. We're happy to have you.
Likewise.
Okay.
Thanks, Matthew.
So, Dave, I've got a question or two from Facebook Live, and then we'll let you go after that. But somebody, I want to make sure I say the person's name here. Let's see, where is it? Stephen Poisson from Facebook Live says, "Hey David, is there a place online to view the 1.5-hour presentation that you gave to the City Council that you spoke of earlier?"
Hey, that's a great question. I know there's a couple presentations I've done that are online. I just can't remember which ones. I've done them for educational organizations as well. But the recent ones, I think there might have been one from Edmonton that is online. I'll try to figure that out, and how do I get that back to you guys?
What you would do, what I would say is you can send that to us via Twitter or via email or what have you, and we'll make sure to not only get back to Stephen, but also to let other folks know that's where they can watch this.
Sure.
Maggie Hanna from Facebook Live is asking, she would like to see Alberta change policy to allow 10% hydrogen in our natural gas pipeline network, and right now the limit is 2%. She wants to know how we could get that done.
There's a big push on for this. I got to say, it's mostly behind the scenes, but oil companies love this idea. ATCO loves this idea, and from what I know, from what little I know, you can do that pretty easily without too much impact on the pipeline system. So, and I know the industry is very interested not only in that, but in utilizing much more hydrogen. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of movement on the hydrogen front, which wasn't there until sometime last year. So I would expect to hear a lot more about hydrogen in coming years, especially here in Alberta.
Okay, so that's almost it for this week's A Climate of Change. David, is there anything that you'd like to communicate to our audience that you have not had the opportunity to yet?
No, not really. I just have to say that I really consider what I've been able to do such an enormous privilege. The people I meet are so inspiring, and I seek out the most inspiring people, and I seek out the projects that are not just cool or crazy, but they're replicable and they can change the world. So if you do have time, I would really encourage you, if you're interested in net zero homes or buildings, I've got about 28 stories on them, some very inspiring stories. Or if you're interested in entrepreneurs and oil companies or EV companies or whatever it happens to be, I have a lot of those kinds of stories as well. So spend some time there at greenenergyfutures.ca. We have about 20 videos or something like that, and 250 stories and about 300 podcasts. We've spent a lot of time gathering these, and they are real examples of the stuff we're all talking about, things we think we should do, and we can do them. Why? Because they work. When I started this project, it was a very different world, and that was only 10 years ago. I remember the first stories I did on solar and wind, and I also remember why I did those stories. I was so appalled by the coverage I would see in the mainstream media at the time. They didn't understand solar. They were acting like it's the enemy of the oil industry, which it's not. It's just another form of energy. And so now today I can say in my stories, and I still have to pinch myself a little bit, that you don't do wind farms today because they're good for us. You do wind farms because that is the cheapest way to generate electricity by a factor of 2. Yeah. And that's been proven in Alberta. We have long-term contracts at 3.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And now that's been proven for solar right here in Alberta. You can make solar at almost that price. And in fact, the largest solar project in Canadian history is being built in Alberta right now called Traverse Solar by the same company I talked about before, Green Gate Power, that is being produced with 0 subsidies. And nobody knows what they can produce electricity for in a project that scale in Alberta, but I'm guessing it's right in there with the wind project. Remember, those numbers I'm giving you, those are retail. Those are the wholesale numbers, not the number they actually cost them. So remember, that means they're producing electricity for less, maybe half that. So we are in the happy circumstance now where these solutions are not only good for the environment, they're better for business. And so that's a really happy thing that's happening. And so I'm not saying everything has to make sense, because there's things we need to do that won't totally make economic sense, but a lot of it does. And so there's really no reason not to do it.
Yeah, when you can make the dollars and cents case, then you start to win. That's just one of the things. David Dodge, thanks so much for coming on A Climate of Change tonight.
My pleasure. Steve, I watched your thing. You're a natural at this, so it was a real pleasure being here. And I met one of your colleagues early on in his career in this stuff, Joe Vipond. Yeah. And I have a great admiration for Joe, and I know he's involved with your organization as well.
Yeah, he another like yourself, a guy that I look up to and admire a great deal. Um, so thanks for being one of those people in my life. Um, okay, so if you liked this Climate of Change series, we want you to know it wouldn't have been possible without our excellent sponsor, Skyfire Energy. They paved the way for solar in Western Canada and will certainly be a big part of our future. I should throw in a quick hook for the Calgary Climate Hub here. I can tell you that if climate is something that provides anxiety in your life, if it's something that gets you down, with talking about doom scrolling and stuff like that when it comes to climate, the only antidote I've ever found in my whole life on this, because I feel that too, and people that really know about climate, we all feel that. The only way to cure that is to be a part of an organization that's moving that ball. And when you're sitting around a table with a bunch of smart people that are looking at achieving bona fide results, you're going to feel the demon being exorcised. So I recommend the Calgary Climate Hub, and Matthew Chapman was on here tonight with Climate Reality Canada. So if you're not in Calgary, you may be able to find a local climate hub that you can join in. There's certainly one in Edmonton. There's one in Vancouver. There's one in Montreal. There's a number of them throughout the cities of Canada. But if there isn't one in your city, start one. What could be more impactful than you pulling together bona fide, impactful change makers and extracting climate victories? If you're interested in volunteering your time, come see us at calgaryclimatehub.ca. We'd love to have you on board. And if all you've got is a few extra bucks that you'd like to throw towards a cause that matters, I'll put Calgary Climate Hub up there with anybody. So consider that an opportunity for you to help out if that'll work for you. Beyond that, I just want to thank my volunteers. Shay Rogers does a whole lot of work on all this, and including putting out all these links in the chat as we go. When a great guest like Dave suggests this, that, or the other, Shay will find it online and put that link in there in the hopes that you're going to be able to go there and increase your knowledge about what we're talking about. And you can go and see Dave's website. You can see all his videos. You can find Climate Reality Canada. All of that stuff's in there. Shay's done so much for us, and she's been so great. So I wanted to thank her for that. Similarly, a climate hubster by the name of Joan Lawrence has done a lot of work to get all of this done, as well as Pamela Scott. And then my good friend Polly has loaned me a microphone and got me set up so I don't sound too rookie. And finally, I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in and caring about the right things. As I mentioned earlier, we're going on a summer hiatus, but I'll announce a little news and let you know we have acquired grant funding from Alberta Eco Trust to produce a second season, if you will, of A Climate of Change starting in the fall and running through to June of 2021, along with our popular Community Climate Conversations Initiative. So stay tuned. We're going to let you, we're going to keep you fully apprised of all of that. Good night for now, and let's get to work. Thanks, Dave.